Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt to Aegon the Conqueror, know about his prophecy? Is his knowledge of it what truly made him bend the knee to Aegon the Conqueror, despite the pleas of his lords, who even after seeing the size of Aegon's army, dragons, and knowing about the burning of Harrenhal and the massacre at the Field of Fire, still wanted to press the attack, thinking their northern valour could win them the day? This is one of those theories where the proof for it is made up mostly of elements that fit the wider narrative of the story nicely, and perhaps can be seen if you are reading between the lines of Fire and Blood, with the knowledge of Aegon's prophecy, thus looking at the text through that lens. Aegon's prophecy is one of those elements that House of the Dragon has added that many fans have taken to, thanks to the knowledge it came directly from George R.R. Martin. With this, and given the fact that the concept of Aegon's prophecy, that Aegon invaded Westeros as he knew about the coming long night, has been a popular fan theory for some time. Thus, fans have started to apply it to the books, looking for clues to its existence, even if so far in the text there has been no direct mention of it. This theory is one of those elements that when looked at through the lens, seems to fit really well with the wider narrative George is trying to build. When Torrhen Stark crossed the neck, reaching the banks of the Trident, he found Aegon the Conqueror and an army half again the size of his own awaiting him to the south of the river. Not only was the army led by Aegon, but it was made up of river lords, Westermen, Stormlanders, Men of the Reach, all of whom had been warring with each other not so long ago, yet Aegon had the power to bring them together under one army, under one king. But most of all, high above the camp, Torrhen saw the Targaryen dragons, Balerion, Meraxes and Vhagar, as they prowled the sky in ever-winding circles. Torrhen Stark's scouts had seen the ruins of Harrenhal, where the slow red fires still burned in the rubble. The king in the north had also heard the accounts of the Field of Fire by this point in time as well. Thus, when King Torrhen sent Brandon Snow, his bastard half-brother, across the Trident, it was not to kill, but to treat. All through that night, messages were sent back and forth between Torrhen and Aegon, and the next morning, Torrhen Stark himself crossed the Trident, where upon the south bank of the river he knelt, laid the ancient crown of the Kings of Winter at Aegon's feet, and swore to be his man, rising up the Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, a king no longer. From that day on, Torrhen Stark is remembered as the king who knelt, but no Northman had left charred remains beside the Trident, which cannot be said for the likes of the Field of Fire, and the swords Aegon collected from Lord Stark and his vassals were not twisted or melted or bent to be part of the Iron Throne. Now, an army that size, with the knowledge of Harrenhal and the Field of Fire, on top of 3 large dragons, might truly have been enough for Torrhen to bend the knee. Seeing the hopelessness of his situation, he may have truly wanted to save the lives of his people. But where this theory comes in is in the question as to what were in those letters sent between Aegon and Torrhen throughout the night that ultimately led to him bending the knee. Was it the promise to spare him, his people, make him Warden of the North? Or was there something more to it? If any of the old kings of the Seven Kingdoms were going to understand and believe Aegon's prophecy, it would be the kings in the north of House Stark. Perhaps Aegon saw an opportunity to bring the north under his domain without the need for bloodshed. Because at the end of the day, Aegon the Conqueror, yes, wanted to take Westeros and unify it under one king. And that's the important part. Unify it and bring him together. War and bloodshed only serves to drive people further apart. And this is why when we think about Aegon the Conqueror, we must remember that while he did fight many battles and thousands died in his conquest, he did genuinely seem to want to try to do it peacefully if possible. Before any blood was spilled, he sent terms to all of the kings when he landed. And even then, when they did not bend the knee, he tried to negotiate before resorting to bloodshed. We can see this with the burning of Harrenhal. Aegon tried to solve the situation peacefully before burning it to a ruin. Thus, it fits that he would try and resolve the situation with Torrhen and the North in the same way. Thus why they negotiated throughout that night. But what did they talk about in those letters? Well, apart from the obvious practical terms of surrender, if anything would convince House Stark and Torrhen to bend the knee, it would be Aegon's knowledge of the coming long night and White Walkers. It is possible that seeing the power of the dragons and how Aegon had managed to rally half of Westeros behind him so quickly, that it might have shown Torrhen that perhaps standing behind this conqueror in the wars to come might actually be their best chance of surviving. This theory also plays into the pact of ice and fire somewhat, between House Stark and the black faction of House Targaryen during the Dance of the Dragons. If, like in the show, Jace has knowledge of Aegon's prophecy via Rhaenyra, and Torrhen Stark via it being passed down by Torrhen, then it might be a factor as to what allowed the pact to happen, and why perhaps House Stark chose to side with Rhaenyra in the first place. I'm working on a video about this idea, as it's beyond the scope of this theory, but this theory of Torrhen knowing about Aegon's prophecy has implications throughout the history of Westeros, and relations between House Targaryen and Stark. You could even argue that it could play some factor in the relationship between Rhaegar and Lyanna, but again, I think that's a topic for another video altogether, as part of the wider discussion about their relationship. The issue with this theory is there's no real hard proof for it, and it is based off an idea from the show that, while fans are quite confident could apply to the books, we don't actually have confirmation of it in the text as of yet. It's all very circumstantial. But what I will say is this: when you read Fire and Blood, knowing about the concept of Aegon's prophecy, you can find loads of things like this, where knowledge of the situation really fits and makes sense. If it turns out that Aegon told Torrhen about the dream, and that is why he bent the knee, it would really not surprise me. But at the same time, it would not surprise me if it was simply overwhelming odds against Torrhen, and all but certain defeat that led to him bending the knee to Aegon. What do you guys think of this idea? Is there really anything to it there? Are our people reaching? Should we even be applying the idea of the prophecy to the books, when we don't even know yet 100% if there's going to be anything like the concept in the book? Let me know in the comments.